All right, Marginal Gains listeners and Marginal Gains TV viewers, we have a super exciting one today. I've got Rob Gitelis, owner, president, CEO, janitor of Factor Bicycles. Like like me, the man who knows that you do it all when you own the company. Rob and I go back, we're just discussing, I think it's 20 years now, which just seems unbelievable. And in his history, I think as in mine, there's just so much interesting stuff. I mean, there's so many stories that I don't think anybody knows. So hopefully we can get some of the really good stuff from the last 20 years to come out in this interview today. So Rob, welcome to Marginal Gains.
Thank you.
So let's start at the beginning. I think like most of us, you end up in this sport because you are racing bikes.
Yeah, it was pretty much like that. That brought me to Taiwan. And then being in Taiwan, I ended up working for a carbon fiber factory, which at that time was a very rare beast. There was two.
And who was that you first ended up there?
Advanced Composite Design was the name of the company.
Okay, so Advanced was behind, for our listeners, behind a lot of the early stuff, right?
They actually made the forks of the beam bike of Zip.
Yep, who they branded? Profile, I think, was the
No,
brand.
even before that.
Oh, even before the Profile. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, no, it's amazing to think of how Taiwan grew for our industry, right? I mean, it was started as just a couple factories, and then really through family connections, friends, investment from the U.S. I mean, you just over that would have been 30 years ago?
It was 1996.
96, okay.
So in 96, Advanced was the biggest golf club maker in the world. And so they had some carbon fiber technology in making golf club shafts. And then there was one other company called Marshall that was making tennis rackets. And they were the other ones that were, trying to learn about bicycles. And so these were the very first two. Now there's probably a couple hundred. But yeah, it's very easy to find ground zero with those two factories.
Yeah, yeah. And how many people can trace the lineage back, right? So I guess they're what would be the grandparents at this point
Yeah.
in the cycling lineage. So you're at Advanced, and did you at that time work with Zip or with Andy at all? That was a little before.
Ironically, I met Andy, but not because of a carbon fiber project, because of Advanced and their golf club business. They had a casting company, and they were actually casting titanium free hook bodies for Zip. And so I met Andy because of that, not because of a carbon fiber product.
Ah, interesting. Yeah, the 217 hub. It was, I guess to put an anchor in time, it was a 217 gram carbon fiber hub in the 90s, when I think the Dura Ace hub of that era was like a little over 600 grams.
Sounds about right.
And it was an absolute nightmare from a maintenance and longevity perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But it was super cool. Super cool. So from Advanced, you find yourself where?
Well, I worked at Advanced for a couple of years. It was kind of funny when I first joined Advanced. They were just getting into bicycles, and they wanted somebody who had a little bit of engineering experience, but more they wanted someone who could ride a bicycle and tell them if it was good or not. And so, it was kind of one of those things where they asked me, "Can you do this?" And I'm like, I had absolutely no idea. But I'm like, sure, I can do it. Figured it out as I went along. So, I worked at Advanced for a couple of years, and I can tell you some stories about going to visit Specialized, or going to visit Santa Cruz, or who else did I visit? I made one trip to the US where I visited several companies, and every one of them said, "No, we don't really buy this technology. We don't think it's going anywhere." And that was, and I loved that came out of Specialized. Yeah, when I visited them, they're like, "No, we don't really see it." Yeah. So I worked there for a couple of years, but the city in Taiwan where they were located was really heavily polluted at the time. And I just wasn't really enjoying living in that city. So I was offered the opportunity to move Profile Design's production from Chicago to Taiwan. And so I left Advance and went to work for Profile, where I did exactly that. I helped them move their production to Taiwan, which was pretty exciting. There's vendors, there's a very famous handlebar company now called Primatech. And I visited Primatech when they were about 6 employees. And I said to them, hey, I want to make this handlebar here. We need about 150,000 of them a year. And they had never heard of a number like that before. and so it's like, now I think a lot of these people who are very wealthy can also, relay back to that, that happenstance meeting of Profile and how it built their company.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah, I think Primatech was one of the first factories you took me to 20 years ago, just to kind of get an understanding of Taiwan, and to see that tube drawing and shaping in real time. It's kind of like magic, right? You just stand there and you're like, is that really happening? That long rod hits that metal slug and you get this beautiful tube shooting out the end. Like that's right. That's just
that's one of those things. So many things I never knew how it was made until I got here, and I'm like, oh, so that's how you do that. I had no idea.
Oh, that's brilliant. So you were at Profile then for a few years.
For a couple of years, yeah. And then from Profile, I was able to start my own company called PMG. PMG still exists now. It's a pretty famous trading company, although I sold PMG to my business partner about 10 years ago, and then decided to go on my own with the company that's now Factor.
Yeah, so PMG, for our listeners, I mean, really is a pretty famous trading company. I mean, I think there was you and I met 2001. You were doing a little bit of stuff, or started doing some stuff for Zip, but I mean, you were doing Cervelo, you were doing, trying to K2. There were probably 30 or 40 brands. I mean, it was pretty amazing to walk around the place and just see all the stuff.
Yeah, I call it a trading company, but of course we owned a carbon fiber factory, we owned a forging factory, but the parent company of it was a trading company.
So I guess help our listeners understand kind of how the system works, right? From kind of the beginning to the, you go into a bike shop to buy that specialized, right?
Well, yeah, perhaps maybe make it a little more simple than that. So when I first launched PMG with my partner, Louis Liu, I think our very first customer was actually Grupo, who owned 3T, Chinelli, and Columbus. And they wanted to produce stems in Taiwan. And up until then, their stems had all been from Italy. And so, they gave us basically a CAD drawing, and they said, we want to make this in Taiwan. And so my partner and I, at that time, we didn't have a factory, but we basically went and, first we opened a forge mold with a forging company, and we bought, blank forges of a stem. It was actually called the 4G. And then we sent it over to another company that did the machining of it, and we sent it to another company that did the grinding and polishing, and then to another company that did the anodize and finally the logos. And so, really what we were sort of like a glorified transportation company, just moving product from one vendor to the next vendor. But that's really how most things work here in Taiwan. There's very few factories actually make all of the process. Usually they have 1 or 2 core competencies, and then everything else they outsource. In the case of metal products, carbon fiber is a bit different. So, we spent a number of years doing things like that, and we had customers like 3T and Chinelli and Syntace and, Truvative, and even Shrama's. I believe there was Shram in there at some point. And so, we did this for, a number of years, and then because I had worked at Advanced, I was always very interested in carbon fiber, obviously. And so, great story. There's also a very famous carbon fiber company called Topkey. They were probably number 5 or 6 to enter the bicycle business. I went to Topkey to have a fork made for Columbus. It was called the Muscle Fork.
I
It's a
remember
pretty
it.
cool design.
Yeah.
And I gave to Top Key the 3D drawing, which at that time 3D was just sort of in its infancy. But we gave them the 3D model. We're like, here, this is what we want. But we weren't maybe as clear as we needed to be. And after about 2 months later, they opened a mold, they made some samples, they handed me the fork. The steer tube was about 4 inches long. And I'm like, so what's this? They're like, yeah, this is the fork. And I'm like, but the steer tube's only 4 inches long. They're like, yeah, because you're drawing. That's how long it was.
Oh, God.
We didn't think that we had to actually specify.
Yeah.
We thought, okay, as long as there's a steer on there, they'll get the rest of it.
Right. You have like the little truncation line with the little squiggly in it, right?
Pretty much, yeah. And then the worst part is that's how they opened the mold.
Oh, God. Yeah.
So it wasn't really even possible then to just go back and make another fork. We had to make another mold.
Right. Oh, God. Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah. I mean, and then Top Key, my God, today they're one of the largest.
That was their very first bicycle product. Now they probably make 80% of Specialized. Then they work for Cervelo, and they work for Scott. They work for Canyon. But they're huge. But so I can trace back to that was their very first bicycle part, and I was the one who engaged them to make it.
Yeah. I remember the first time I ever went to Top Key was with you, and you were doing the Nike shoes for Trek.
That's right.
And I remember we went. There was like half a dozen different special fabrics or whatever that you guys were doing for the Lance's tour shoes that year or something, and we went and sat in their amazing big boardroom and looked at remember that was the era of oh God, what was it called? White carbon? Is that what everybody was calling it?
White carbon.
White carbon.
That's what people called it. Yeah, fiberglass.
Yeah. It was like colored metallized fiberglass. It was hugely popular for 4 years. There, but it's an amazing. They also make like carbon fiber helmets for like the motorsports industry. Probably darn near all of them, right?
That is one of their bigger business units, and then they do. They also are in the aviation business as well, doing parts for Airbus. So, they're quite big.
Yeah, no, it's impressive. It's
impressive. Just down the street from me in Taiwan.
So I guess back to kind of how a bike gets made, right? So you're talking, something as seemingly simple as a stem is going to have 10 vendors, right? And is a huge logistics challenge. And that's basically every part on the bicycle.
Well, it's every part. Of course, Shimano takes care of their own, or SRAM takes care of their own. But every part not from those guys is made exactly, that way. And so, over the years, so many different brands have, come to either my current company or my former company, and asked us to make those kind of products for them. And, in the beginning, carbon fiber was sort of the same way. Now it's more about going direct to factories, that make 100% of the product. But back then, Nike would come to me and say, this is what I want. And then I would decide, how to source those for Nike, because Nike didn't really have any understanding of carbon fiber. And they also, everybody has sort of their core competencies, and they're just like, we just want to buy a shoe sole. We don't really want to get too deep into how they're made and all that other stuff. So,
right.
Or where they're made even.
So true. So I guess towards the end of PMG, you guys had your hands in, so you mentioned Lewis earlier. Lewis's background was titanium.
That's right, yeah.
And so you guys had your hands in, so much titanium stuff. And then you were really running the carbon side of the business, and I think you guys had your hands in everything that was coming out that was carbon.
There was a time where we were probably making maybe like a market share of like 80% of carbon fiber handlebars, drop handlebars.
Yeah.
We really, really sort of, controlled a lot of that market. At that time we were working for Syntace, 3T, Bontrager, Zip, Those are pretty big ones. So, yeah.
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 Well, and I think what really put you guys on the map, I mean, certainly why Zip ended up there was you were the one company that had invested heavily in testing. And so,
Yeah.
I think if you go to Taiwan to look at carbon fiber manufacturing, your shop was the only shop I'd ever seen that had a full scale legitimate test lab. And
Yeah, I think
that's huge,
I think,
right?
yeah, I think we were lucky that Syntace was also one of our first customers. And many people in North America don't know Syntace, but Syntace is a very, heavily testing, engineer-driven handlebar company from Germany. And so he was very insistent that anyone that he worked with had to be able to duplicate the same testing he was doing in Germany. And so, and my partner, Lewis, was also very sort of fascinated by testing. It was really, something that he was very much into. So it definitely was, it was a value added that we offered. Again, most people have caught up. At Factor now, we still probably one of the best test labs of a bicycle brand outside of maybe Trek and Specialized, but because it was a factory's test lab that just kind of morphed into Factors. But, we still take it very seriously.
I mean, to me, it's such a huge business advantage, right? I mean, I think of, I would come and do a trip with you, or I'd sleep on your floor or whatever, and we would make the parts, right? Like kind of knock the flash off, and you walk them down the hall and bolt them into the machine and go, right? I think that.
Yeah, I mean, back in the days, I remember, when we were working with Santa Cruz not that long ago, we used to make a frame in the morning and test a frame in the afternoon. There's really no other company that has that same ability to move that fast. Yeah. So usually it's a week between iterations, and we always try to keep it a day between iterations.
Yeah, no, it's just such an advantage. So I guess take us through. So you sell PMG, or you?
Yeah, I sold PMG to my partner, thinking I wanted to maybe slow down a little bit, but some of my customers at that time weren't quite ready for me to slow down just yet. So, I sold my carbon fiber factory to Lewis, and within 6 months I had built a new carbon fiber factory and was again supporting those same people, and they all left PMG and came to follow me. And I guess Lewis, in hindsight, should have had a better contract, but I never really, wasn't my plan. It's just kind of the way it worked out. So, I think a lot, I sort of should really digress here, because one of the things as far as the bicycle frame business that really, affected my life so much was, when I was working at Advanced Composites one night, I was working late and we got a phone call, and there was these foreigners on the line, and it was these two guys that had a bunch of questions about bicycles, about frames, and what would it take to make a carbon fiber frame. And I sort of went, and I explained, this is the tooling cost, this is how long it would take, this is how much a frame would be, all of those things. And the guys were very interested in it, but finally they decided that, where their company was, they weren't ready for that expense yet. But, this is almost before email. So this was all done, over telephone and fax.
Yeah.
But we decided to stay in touch. And then when I moved to Profile, I ran into these same guys again, except now they had a bicycle brand called Cervelo.
Yeah.
And then and then when I left Profile and started my own company, they now were at the point where they wanted to start to try to make some bikes outside of Canada. And so I was, kind of very fortuitous that we kept in touch. And so I think the first year of Cervelo, we made 75 frames, something like that. And the last year that I made frames for Cervelo was something like 44,000.
Wow.
And so it was a very nice business to grow my business with. And, we both learned so much along the way about bikes and carbon fiber and many things. Of course, I didn't just work for Cervelo. I worked for, like I said, Santa Cruz, and I worked for Trek and BH and a number of other brands. So we ended up with a very large business, but it was all, growing, 50% per year, every year for 20 years. It was a lot to manage.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think for the listeners that and I see you've got your CSC jersey in the back on the wall there. I mean, you in that way were a real connection point between Zip and Cervelo, and really most of those brands that ended up in the T and speed play. And
yeah,
I think when that opportunity came around, they were trying to get into the Pro Tour, we were trying to get in the Pro Tour, and it was like as soon as one of us had a foot in the door, the rest of us, everybody was like, trying to hold the door open to like let everybody else come in. But you were really such a connection point for that, right? Because I think, Phil and Gerard and Richard and you and me, I mean, my God, how many, my wife's not listening, how many nights at the bar, right? Did we all spend hanging out, and how many trips and how many trade shows and how many, I mean, it was really an unbelievable period of time that I think changed a lot about the industry.
I always said, our industry has, I think, some faults in it, in that people are not, like, companies are not more friendly with one another. And I always said that inside of my own factory, inside of my own company, I would only work with brands that could get along with other brands, because I want to be able to take everybody to dinner together. I don't want to have to be worried about trying to organize different dinners or different things. And so that was always, when I would take on a customer, I would always think about, well, how's this going to work with another customer? And so sure, there was a time when we were Cervelo, we were Zip and Speedplay, which were, a very important part of the Cervelo test team. And then of course, Steve Smith, the president of Castelli, is my best friend. So yeah, I mean, that to me is just such a golden era, right? Yeah.
I mean, everybody at Din Tai Fung, right? It was like the world's greatest dumplings. After the trade show, it's really forming. I mean, I look at how that web expands today, and the modern form of SILCA still does business in some way or another with almost all of those brands and those same people.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing to think of how that kind of, again, that was the grandparent moment, right? Filtering down.
Yeah.
Excellent.
And so, there was times, and so I was really, I always kind of relished that behind the scenes sort of job. But I mean, there was times where, I recall, gluing the frames together for Carlos Sastre by myself, the week before the Tour de France. There was a time where I think it was the Giro, where I flew to Italy with like 15 frames with me. And I flew there, and I actually met Gerard from Cervelo near the baggage carousel, and he had flown from Canada, and he had hockey bags full of all of the group sets. And my goal was only to get it out the door, and then I was basically done. And I didn't even go to the race. I just dropped it off with him. But then I remember we were walking towards the exit, and he's like, "So where are you going?" I'm like, "Nothing to declare." He's like, "Oh." I went straight through it.
Oh God, where was it? Was it Friedrichshafen? I ran into you on the ferry into Switzerland, and you had, it wasn't a hockey bag, but you like a bike bag full of all these frames, and we were chatting, and I hadn't seen you in a while, and I always had to laugh. The guy, what's in there? And you pull out the invoice, and it was like, $15 or whatever. And he's like, "Oh, very good. Go ahead." Like,
yeah, as long as you had an invoice, that's all they cared about.
That's right. Like, oh, he's done this before. It is amazing though. I mean, I think so much of the behind the scenes so much of that stuff is happening, right? That, when somebody gets the yellow jersey and they pull the bike out with the yellow graphics the next day, in almost every case outside of like Team Sky and maybe a couple others, that was some absolute total freak out panic in the back end that involved somebody flying somewhere, somebody probably sneaking something across a border or into somewhere, or somebody in a hotel room, like, with an X-Acto knife, like peeling graphics and making that happen through the
I
night.
saw a rider at Hishadal's Giro bike, and that's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. And those are the best stories too, right? I think back, those were some of my favorite days. Those super late nights, just trying to make it happen. So coming out of this, so we've kind of left the PMG period, but we're not at factory yet.
No. So I worked for a couple more years. I was still building bikes for a number of brands, and it was going fine. And then the consolidations started. My friends started to leave their companies behind. I actually think the first might have been Andy. And so.
Yeah, actually, I think timeline wise, I think you're right.
Yeah. So what happened was we always had really nice working relationships with Zip, with Cervelo, with Santa Cruz, these different brands that really relied on my company to basically take care of all their needs in Asia. And then, all of a sudden, using Zip as an example. So then Andy sells Zip. I'm very happy for Andy, but then he leaves me with SRAM. And SRAM, while they're really nice guys, they run their company a lot different than the way Zip had been run before that. SRAM would negotiate the price, and then a few weeks later, the cost down engineers would arrive, and then we're going to send you an order for 3 stems a day, every day, and we need you to do QC, 100-point checklist on every stem every day. And it just became, less fun. And then it also became, a matter of, we were getting things called request for quote, an RFQ. And then, you would give them the quote and they'd be like, oh, sorry, you didn't win this because, we went with this other factory for one reason or another. And so that started with Zip, and then it moved on to Cervelo, and it moved on to Santa Cruz. And in all of those cases, price was never really the defining factor, to use the pun. It was always, the quality, the delivery, the friendship, making sure that, I had the back of those brands, those people. Andy always knew he could call me. Phil Gerard did always call me. You could call me. Everybody always knew that. And it became a much kind of different way of working, and one that I didn't really enjoy anymore. So, and then, we were always on the expensive side, I believe. And so, those brands, they spent a lot of money to buy these companies. They want to now, recoup that money. So they're looking to lower their costs. So they moved to lower cost engineering places or lower cost manufacturing. Or they, in the case of SRAM, they eventually do it by themselves inside. Yeah. And so that's really what drove me to decide I didn't want to keep chasing after it anymore, and I just wanted to start to develop my own brand. So I came up with the brand Black Ink, and then I purchased the brand Factor. Yeah.
I remember I saw you somewhere and you said, hey, I'm making a wheel now. I just remember thinking, oh, good luck. It's so hard. And then I saw you again a few months later. You're like, it's really hard. Like, I feel for you. But it's all hard. I mean, that's what makes it worth doing, right? I think these products.
It's like everything. If it was easy, everybody would do it, right? And everybody would do it well if it was easy. So.
Well, and so I guess that's a good time to, I think all this industry consolidation times up, I mean, really almost perfectly overlaps with kind of this rise of China, right? And Vietnam factories and these things, which, I get super frustrated when people conflate China and Taiwan. Whoa, these are not the same. Taiwan right now is really the Germany of Asia. In terms of manufacturing. And I remember that period well from a kind of being involved, but not really having any say in how a lot of this supply chain stuff happens. And Taiwan just was expensive, and all of a sudden you could make stuff in, everybody knew you could go to China and get it much, much cheaper. And so everybody just jumped ship and went.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think they could trace the bicycle industry was actually in Japan. And so it made a very short stop in Taiwan, maybe about 15 years. And then, so it went from Japan to Taiwan to China. And then with the trade war with the US, that really sped up the movement from China now to Southeast Asia. And so China is almost behind now as well. And everything is moving to Vietnam and Cambodia and Myanmar, those places. I also said, when I was going to start Factor, that I was not going to chase low cost manufacturing anymore. Because I would have been forced to move to Vietnam or Myanmar, or one of those places, if I wanted to continue to stay relevant, which, I think that it's, you have to draw the line in the sand somewhere. I think that the prices in Myanmar, what I read but the human rights and things like that, I think it's a real trade-off of what's going on. And I don't think it's a healthy thing for the long term of our industry.
Yeah.
So I stay in Taiwan.
Yeah. Well, and you hit on it earlier, but Taiwan has really become, you think of, just how much of the carbon fiber 787 from Boeing is made in Taiwan, right? In South Korea, and how much Airbus and, what was the factory? Buffalo and Golden, the two owners? Tentec. Yeah. I remember, being there with you, I don't know, a dozen years ago, and it, they were making all of the seat shells for Lear, all the jets and the aerospace business in Taiwan is just amazing right now. And I think that's one of the things that people don't think about, right? I think the average person still thinks of, that sporting goods come from Taiwan. It's like, that's a lot of that's moved, and Taiwan is really focusing on some pretty heavy value add aerospace, medical. It's really amazing infrastructure there for production.
Yeah, well, it's kind of funny, maybe an easier way to sort of explain Taiwan is a lot of people think of Taiwan as a low-cost place, but in Taiwan, houses in Taiwan cost far more than houses in North America, for example. Cars are far more expensive. Almost everything is, except bicycle parts. And the reason behind the bicycle parts is the proximity of all of the subcontractors. If you're in Indianapolis and you need to get something anodized, perhaps there's one factory within 100 miles of Indianapolis. Because I know from Chicago, we used to send, from Chicago, we had to send to Texas to get things anodized. If I look at where our company is in Taichung, in Taiwan, and I draw a 20-kilometer circle around it, there's probably 15 anodized factories in that 20-kilometer circle. Yeah. And that's for every subcontractor. That's for our paint suppliers, our EPS, our latex. There's just so much resources available in a very small place that enables us to keep our costs down. But it's not a low-cost place of doing work at all.
Yeah, no, I agreed. And I will tell you that we actually have probably the best anodizer in the country is here in Indianapolis.
There you go.
But to prove your point, up until they built their own anodized facility in-house, Chris King used to send all of his parts to Indianapolis from Oregon.
So from Portland, Oregon to Indianapolis to get it
back. So yeah, there's truly probably six anodized houses in the U.S. that could do the quality level, or the Class A finished stuff that we need for our industry. In a country our size, and you go to Taiwan, and before lunch we could visit 15 of them in Taichung, which is I love going there. I'd love going and visiting and hanging out with you and seeing just the stuff that you can see. It's technologies that don't exist in our country anymore. We can go visit 3 vendors in a day. Yeah. Right? You can really see some amazing stuff. Okay, so take us now to, I
Yeah,
guess, like the
so
beginning of
maybe,
Factor, right?
well, maybe to sum it up. So there's a company called Pawn. A lot of people have heard of them. So
Yep.
Pawn came and they bought Cervelo, Focus, and Santa Cruz all within a year of each other. Those were my three biggest customers. And
Yeah.
so it just became really unsustainable. So then, I decided to start Factor. Factor was a bike that was built by a company in Norfolk, UK, called BF1 Systems. And they had a program with Aston Martin. When Aston Martin launched the 177, they launched a bike called the 001 to go along with it. And if you bought a 177, you had the opportunity for 40,000 pounds to buy a Factor 001. And they sold 66 of them. So not a bad number at 40,000 pounds. And it's a pretty amazing bike because, I have two of them actually. It had direct mount brakes before we had ever seen direct mount brakes. It had hydraulic road levers that they actually ended up selling the patent to Shimano. So they took a Shimano lever and they turned an STI lever into a hydraulic lever on their own. And then they ended up actually selling that technology to Shimano. And then it had all kinds of telemetry and other things in it. It was really quite cool. And they made it all in-house, their own power meter. But it was really just a technology showcase for them. They were never really planning on getting into the bicycle business. But it was quite cool. And so I approached them and asked, if they would be interested in selling some of their intellectual property and the brand. And, the owner of the company really loved bicycles. And he's like, well, I'd really like to see this move on. He's like, it'd be great to see if this could become a real company. So essentially, we ended up with the name only, and then decided to develop bikes. And so I had a business partner in Baden Cook, the green jersey winner in the Tour de France. And so he had some connections into racing, obviously. And so we decided right away that we were going to sponsor a team called One Pro Cycling, which is out of the UK. And we started to sponsor them even before we had a bicycle available to sell. Our first 100 bikes were to supply that team. And it was a pro continental team. It was pretty exciting. They got to ride some fairly big races. It was good that, good learning about, getting some riders onto our bikes. But, I already had quite a bit of confidence in the bike because I had already been making bikes for so many years. But it was more about understanding the business side that had really no idea. And so at first it was just kind of like dabbling into this. I'm like, well, I'll have Factor, but I'll keep doing my other OEM business on the side. And, but then, before long, a year later, there's the opportunity to sponsor AG2R, the World Tour Professional team. And we're like, well, that's pretty risky. We're still not selling any bikes yet, but this will definitely put us on the map. And so, I decided to take that risk and sponsored the team. Roman Bardet had actually seen Factor and, they were asking him, so, you're complaining you don't like the bike. What bikes do you want? And he asked for a few different bikes to try. And one of them was Factor. And he liked it. And so that's what enabled us to actually enter into that agreement, so it worked out pretty well. But it's still pretty daunting that we still didn't really have a sales chain at that point. So now we're sponsoring a Tour de France team, which is a lot of money and a lot of bikes, and we're still not really selling any bikes yet. And so I kind of decided, well, I really need to commit to this, and so really need to put sort of our contract manufacturing on the back burner and really start to focus on that. And so that was 2017. And ever since then, been sort of, marching forward with Factor and Black Ink and going fairly well.
No, that's awesome.
It's pretty crazy that we were third place in the Tour de France our first year.
Yeah.
Stage win at the Tour de France. The next year, stage win at the Tour de France. Not on the podium, but second place at Paris-Roubaix. It was quite a ride with AG2R. We knew that we needed to take a year away because it's very expensive to be there. And we had to really spend time just getting our company sort of organized, and ready to sort of take the next big steps forward. So we took a year out of the world tour, but then obviously we've gone back in this year, 2020, with Israel Startup Nation, which has been quite exciting. But it's, we signed very late in the year, but yet we were still able to deliver all the bikes on time. So it was definitely a lot of lessons learned from the G2R experience.
Yeah. So I guess for you, coming from the one side to the other, and I know this is certainly my experience. When you're engineering and making stuff, you think, oh, I mean, this is the hard work. And then when you're running the company and you think, oh my God, this is the hard work. Like for you, what's the hardest, or I guess the biggest, hardest lesson learned in your transition?
I think when you have a factory, again, you have the same experience. It's very easy to know, okay, if I buy that machine, I'm going to be able to make these products or this amount more products. So this is, it's very easy to calculate your expenditures when you have a factory. I have this many people, okay, I know what is my capacity. If I increase 20 more people, what would then be my capacity? Is there the demand? It's really easy to understand the expenditures. With a brand, you spend so much money on marketing and you have no idea if it's working. And so that's the hardest thing I find. And then it's like, so then justifying that, it's really, trying to have some sort of metric for justifying the marketing spends, and then making sure you're doing it right. Yep. is really a big challenge, because I really like to think of us as an engineering company that has to do marketing, not the other way around.
Right.
And so, but I think we're doing it okay. But it's really a hard part. I think the other really difficult part is just working, as a factory. It's always pretty clear, I made this, I sell it to you, you pay me, right? When you start working with many layers of distribution or sales, the whole getting paid part takes a bit more challenging, I would say.
Yeah, cash flow certainly is one for me. I like to joke that, in my previous life, I understood cash flow in my brain, and now I understand cash flow in my stomach.
Yeah. No, there's definitely been months where I'm like, wow, we don't actually have enough money at the end of the month. There's been months like that. Yeah, it's you definitely lose sleep over it. It's better now, thankfully. But yeah, it's definitely like that in the beginning. And again, running a factory, you don't have those concerns. But it was kind of funny. I used to always look at some of my customers. I'm like, God, you guys have it easy. You're just selling and you have this big margin. And now I realize, no, there is no easy part to this.
Yes, that's a good way to put it. That's awesome. So you guys are, the bikes look amazing. I think for our listeners and our viewers, you got to go check out these bikes. They are truly beautiful. Technologically, aesthetically. Are you doing, are you still have your hands in the engineering and aesthetics, or?
We have a designer named Inigo Gisbert, who is kind of like, he's responsible for the industrial design. Recently, Graham Shreve left Cervelo and joined Factor. So he's managing the engineering. It was myself doing it up until Graham joining. But Graham and I have worked together for so many years that, we already have very similar ideas about what we're after. I think what I focus on the most right now, besides the business side, is, our goal is always really the fit and finish of our frames. And I'm really always trying to improve that, and make sure that we are basically what I consider the best. And so, that's where I'm spending my time, as far as the product goes at the moment.
Yeah, no, the stuff, it looks amazing. And I'm super happy for you. And so where's your biggest market at this point?
It was kind of interesting. As a new brand, the early adopters, I believe, are always the Asian countries. They're much quicker to accept a new brand. So in the very beginning, we've done exceptionally well in Asia. Of course, our proximity to Asia and a lot of people knowing that I'm here in Taiwan, I think helps that quite a bit. And then, throughout, I would say our next obvious market is the UK, where Factor was born. And then, we're doing okay in the United States and we're doing okay in the rest of Europe. But there's definitely room to grow in those markets. I think that the US is a very crowded market for bikes. Yeah. And Europe is a very traditional market. It's always difficult for a new brand to break in. But I think over time, they're starting to accept us more and more. In Europe, and the US is starting to go fairly well.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the time is the hard part, right? I mean, I think even, for us with SILCA being a 100-year-old brand, it's still taking time to, you talk to a shop 5-6 times before they decide to bring you in. Or I think with Zip, I mean, we were 10 years into Zip. I remember we were probably like 40-50% of the wheel count at Kona. And we would be at Kona and triathletes would walk into the booth and be like, "Oh, what's your company do?" Like, what do you mean, what do we do? But it just, I mean, that recognition just takes so much time.
It really does. And I think that's why you spend the money, in the World Tour sponsorship, is it gets you that instant credibility at a huge expense. But if you don't do that, then the amount of time that it would take to get that recognition really does take a very long time, especially to start to cross over into the more mainstream. But, it was, a lot of times people are like, so, what's one of your, the big moments for you? And I said, I think it's Bicycling Magazine. There was what's your next bike? And on the cover was Specialized Giant Cannondale and Factor. And I was like, wow. Like, that really says something, that we've done this in 4 years, to be, in that very rarefied air with those other 3 brands. So, but, I think that my goal that I set for Factor from the very beginning was I wasn't going to follow all of the industry rules, and I think the product that we sell starts to really, show that. I think, there was the bike called the Cervelo RCA, which was a $10,000 bike made in California. And I was involved in that in a roundabout way. I can tell you that the bill of materials for our Factor VAM is actually more expensive than that Cervelo RCA. But we're not selling our VAM for $10,000. We're selling it for less than half of that, because I don't need to follow the industry norms of, I need to make this absolute minimum margin and all of those things. I want to make the very best bikes, and I want them to be readily available.
Oh, I love that view, the attitude. It's a lot like where we are, right? I think like you do something for long enough and you go, I'm kind of tired of doing that thing, and let's go do something just different, right? It's a breath of fresh air, and it's nice to break the rules a little bit here and there, right? Or at least not be confined by them in that same way. So awesome. All right. Well, Rob, this was always enjoyable chatting with you, and great to see you in our quarantine all day on Zoom life. It's still fun to hop on Zoom for and just have a great conversation. So huge thanks for your time.
Thank you.
All right.